Hello, hello, it's Big Cheds. I'm back with another episode of My Battles with Cancer, a candid patient and caregiver's memoir. I'm a cancer survivor, and my mother had cancer, so I was also a caregiver. I wrote my memoir as a way to help people who are going through cancer, they know someone who has cancer, and there's so much that's unknown. I wanted to do this. So I published the book in 2020. I republished it in 2023 after doing some edits. And then I just have the audiobook out recently on Audible. You can listen to the whole thing. I'm also the author of Trading Wisdom, which is quite popular, thank you, and Trading Quotes, also available on Amazon. I'm Big Cheds on Twitter, Cheds Trading on YouTube. I want this book, Battles with Cancer, to be available to everybody and anyone. So I'm doing it for free on YouTube, one chapter at a time. Last time we did Starting Radiation. And you find out what it's like to go through radiation. And now we're halfway home again, and that's the chapter where we're going to pick up in the story. Halfway home again. Throughout the following week, I pressed on with my treatment, and after finishing my 8th session of radiation, I sent this update to my Twitter followers. Quote, so far, halfway done with radiation and 0 side effects. May 21st, 2018 at Big Cheds. Some of the kind responses from my followers are below. Happy to hear that, buddy. Hope it stays that way at Evangelos. Awesome news at The Crypto Kid. Great to hear. We are with you at Larry Moore. Thank you, folks. Most afternoons, while waiting for my appointment, I parked myself in a massive hallway that had a lot of foot traffic between the two main sets of elevators. There were many young parents walking around as well, the mothers slowly moving with massive bellies that strained their backs, and the fathers looking nervous, tired, scared, and out of place. A steady stream of medical professionals passed by as well, from doctors and nurses of every stripe to orderlies moving the equipment and food around. I often thought about how the service staff were the lifeblood of the hospital and were likely underappreciated for the critical role they played. I also observed various older couples visiting with family members or who were there for their own medical care, many of whom were frail and unable to easily move around without assistance. Just by sitting back and observing the action for 10 or 15 minutes, one could get a pretty good sense of the day-to-day life at the hospital. This was a living, breathing ecosystem full of mystery and wonder, full of life, but also undeniably full of death. I was struck with the juxtaposition of all those young, expecting parents and the old and unhealthy folks being transported around. This was a powerful place and, in many ways, inspiring, but also sobering for me as I went through my own journey. It made me think a lot about life and death and what it all meant to me. It was incredibly hard not to be moved by sitting around and observing, as I often experience almost secondhand the joy, pain, and misery of those around me. During my 8th session of radiation treatment, I experienced an unforgettably emotional moment involving a young woman and her family. When I arrived for my appointment, I noticed an Indian family in the waiting area. Based on their body language, I deduced that the two older persons were either parents or in-laws of the younger man with them, and he appeared to be in his early 30s. After making brief eye contact with the mother, a woman with warm brown eyes and dressed in flowing silks, I went inside the changing room to get dressed before returning. The waiting area itself was rather small and, in theory, only had space for 5 people to sit. And on this day, 4 of those 5 seats were filled, making it rather snug and perhaps more intimate than either I or this family would have wanted. For most of my prior appointments, I had been alone in the waiting area, so it was unusual for me to see other people there while I was waiting. And given the snug tight area, snug nature of this waiting area, you were forced to perform the same social courtesies you would to the person sitting right next to you on a jammed subway. Glancing around, I tried to figure out what was going on with this older couple and the younger man, and I wondered if maybe they were doing the same with me. Moments later, a tall and slender Indian woman with terrified eyes came out of those large doors, with her cheeks swollen berry red from crying. I decided that she was likely the wife of that young man. She ran into the waiting area and plopped down next to what turned out to be her husband, collapsing on his shoulder while erupting into tears. Feeling her pain deeply as I was only feet away, this woman was devastated. It was hard not to be moved, but I dared not say anything. This was a private moment, or rather, it should have been a private moment. I was in some ways embarrassed to be sharing in that experience with them. Ever so carefully, I glanced over at the parents and studied their faces. I wanted to see how they were reacting to her misery so I could get a better sense of the dynamic of the moment. As a parent myself, it was hard not to understand that they must have been feeling absolutely helpless and frustrated with their inability to do anything about this woman's pain. Watching that scene unfold brought me back to when I first received my cancer diagnosis and how hard that moment really was on my family. A few minutes later, a nurse appeared to speak with the family. I had met with this nurse a few times before myself, and my sense of her was both wise and easygoing. When we first met, I took to her immediately, and I was comfortable talking to her. It was clear to me that she had been around the block, so to speak. I was curious to hear what she had to say to this family, as I had yet to see her deal with such a serious situation. All of our conversations had been light and fun, due to, in part, my feeling that I had already beaten my cancer. As she approached this family, the woman who had just collapsed onto her husband's shoulder stood up to greet the nurse. Standing there in her hospital gown and looking vulnerable, I felt so bad for her and whatever she was going through. She was at the mercy of the hospital to fix her illness, and I could see the fear in her eyes and body language. The nurse apologized for how long the examination had gone on for and explained that they were having trouble setting up the machine correctly for her specifications. She also said that they would not be able to go forward with their original plan, as they were unable to find the right angle to attack her tumor without risking damage to the other parts of her body. I got the sense that this woman had recently received a cancer diagnosis, and radiation was her first line of treatment. She seemed full of despair. I shared with her some of that pain, having gone through a similar experience myself. However, I did notice the contrast between our two situations. She was just starting treatment, and I was in the process of finishing my treatment. I viewed my radiation as almost a tune-up, thinking that I was merely having to suffer through a minor dose of radiation, and then I would be on my way. Quote, powerful moment while waiting for my radiation. A woman comes out of the room after her radiation therapy and is greeted by her husband and parents, who are in the waiting area with me. She sits down and lays her head on her husband's shoulder and cries. Hard not to be moved. May 24th, 2018 at Big Cheds. And it really was hard not to be moved, being right there. That night, while decompressing, I thought a lot about the hospital staff and that they had to deal with people like this distraught lady and her family on an everyday basis. Presumably, most patients were not as upbeat and positive thinking as I was. It must be incredibly hard to go into work every day and deal with folks who are fighting for their lives when you were just trying to get the job done to feed your family or pursue an academic endeavor. Another powerful moment happened just before my 12th or 13th visit, and I encountered a man waiting for his radiation therapy session to begin. This man reminded me of my third grade math teacher, who, until this day, I imagine with a white short sleeve shirt, a brown briefcase, and a black pocket protector. At first glance, he came across as humble and open, and I immediately empathized with him as a fellow patient and a fellow human being. The staff that day was running behind, and this man's appointment was ahead of my appointment, so we had nothing to do other than to sit quietly or talk to each other. So we started out by sharing our stories, and I told him that I had just completed 6 sessions of chemotherapy, and I was there for follow-up treatment to receive 30 gray of radiation in 2 areas. This man, who seemed to be about 10 years older than me, began to tell me his story. He told me that back in 2015, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And then, after some consultation with the doctors, they performed surgery to remove a tumor. For the next 2 years, he believed that he had beaten his cancer, and then it came back. This man rather stoically told me that he was about to start a new radiation regimen that day. I looked at him closely and I tried to imagine what he was going through. And then I realized that he was in the same position a few years ago as I was then and there. He went on to say that he had seen 2 different doctors. One of them gave him a 60% chance to beat the cancer, and another one gave him a 70% chance. They both explained that if the cancer spread any further, they would only be able to slow it down. Hearing those words, slow it down, really hit home, and it reminded me of the undeniably never quitting power of cancer. It is not an enemy to be messed around with, that's for sure. After considering the difficulty of this man's journey, I again thought about my own condition and how radiation felt like almost routine maintenance to me. This brave individual was facing a daunting challenge, and I appreciated that he was willing to share his story with me. At the end of our conversation, I thanked him and I wished him well, and I let him know that he had helped me to gain some valuable perspective. As this man was led into the treatment area and through those large doors, I was again reminded of how tough a job the staff had on a daily basis. They had to deal with folks who were facing life and death struggles. With this fact in mind, I made sure to be as positive and friendly as I could during my visits, not only to make my experience better, but also that of the hospital staff that were working so hard to make sure I had the care I needed. More than anything, I was extremely grateful not to be facing as tough a battle as some of the other patients I had come across while receiving my radiation treatment. The remaining visits went rather well, and by the time I knew it, I was approaching my last session. As one might expect, by now I had come to know the radiation therapy team pretty well and even felt like we were becoming friends. We talked about each other's families, and I enjoyed learning about their career ambitions and how they had ended up in that place with me. It was nice to get to know them as they were sharing such an important part of my life. Now, as I approached the end of my treatment schedule, I realized that I was going to miss them, and that was something I had not seen coming ahead of time. Quote, 6 sessions of chemotherapy and 15 sessions of radiation. Last one today. Big shout out to all the doctors and nurses, and especially you guys, for all the support. I am forever grateful, and I really am. June 1st, 2018 at Big Cheds. After the completion of my final radiation therapy session, I was escorted out those doors by the technicians. And as foreshadowed on my 5th visit, I grabbed the mallet and I was fortunate enough to ring that gong. The cheering sounds and wonderful well wishes buoyed my spirits. And afterwards, I walked confidently towards the changing room with a satisfied smile on my face. Once I was inside, I took off that hospital gown for the last time, and I once again stared into the mirror, feeling stronger than ever and ready to start a new chapter in my life. I emerged feeling like a hero, and I thanked everyone once again before strolling out the door and head first towards my new life. Ring that bell, baby. Let's start the celebration. June 1st, 2018 at Big Cheds. This was a big moment for me. And of course, my followers celebrated with me. Quote, "This is awesome, man. Makes me remember what is important in life." At Mixmaster Molo. "Congratulations, Senor Cheddar. I'm happy to see you doing well." At Senor Lupe. Folks, that is halfway home again. This is My Battles with Cancer, a candid patient and caregiver's memoir. I'm a cancer survivor, cancer caregiver for my mother, and I wrote about my experience to help other people. I published it in 2020, republished it in 2023. It's available now in audiobook, Kindle paperback as well. I am the author of Trading Wisdom and Trading Quotes, also available on Amazon. I'm Big Cheds on Twitter. I'm Cheds Trading on YouTube. And that's where I'm doing this book for free. I want the whole thing to be available for free. I'm reading it one chapter at a time, and that's what this is. We're going to be back with Finish Strong for the next chapter. Folks, thank you so much. I appreciate that you're here, and I will talk to you soon.